why being a knight was not that cool. Welcome to another dark, historically accurate bedtime story. Tonight we'll tuck you in with the harsh reality of knighthood. That glorious career your kindergarten teacher promised would be all dragons and damsels. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was more like signing up for a lifetime of chronic back pain with a side order of dysentery. So settle in beneath your comfortable, modern blankets. Feel their softness against your skin and be grateful you weren't born in the 12th century, because by the time our tale concludes, you'll be kissing your indoor plumbing and antibiotics goodnight with newfound appreciation. Congratulations. You've just been born into mediocrity. The year is 1180, and you've just opened your eyes to the cold stone walls of your father's modest manor. The rushes on the floor are changed only seasonally, filling the air with a distinct aroma of mildew, and whatever scraps from last month's meals have fallen between them. A single narrow window allows a meager shaft of light to penetrate the perpetual gloom, illuminating the floating dust particles that comprise much of your breathing air. As the third son of a minor noble, you're essentially worthless in the grand scheme of inheritance. Your eldest brother gets the land, your middle brother gets pushed toward the church, and you get the privilege of becoming someone else's glorified bodyguard. The feudal system has deemed you surplus to requirements before you've even learned to walk. We've arranged for you to begin training as a page. Your father announces on your 7th birthday, the same day most children receive toys, or perhaps a small cake. His voice betrays neither regret nor particular interest in your future. Lord Geoffrey has graciously agreed to take you into his household. What your father doesn't mention is that Lord Geoffrey owes him money, and taking you as a page is cheaper than paying his debts. Congratulations. You've just been traded like a medieval baseball card. Your value: approximately 3 sacks of grain and the cancellation of a gambling debt accrued during last summer's tournament. Your mother weeps as she packs your single change of clothing. Be brave, she whispers, though her eyes say, I'm sorry, I couldn't produce a daughter who could be married off advantageously instead. The family dog shows more emotion at your departure, whining pathetically as you're hoisted onto a cart bound for Lord Geoffrey's estate. At least someone will miss you. Subscribe if you've ever been tricked into a career that sounded cooler than it is. The page years, childhood. Never heard of her at 7 years old, while modern children are learning to ride bikes and complaining about homework. You're learning to serve wine without spilling it on Lord Geoffrey's expensive imported tablecloth. Your days start before dawn, your small hands already raw from washing in cold water that seems specially designed to be just above freezing temperature, regardless of season. The lye soap burns your cracked skin, but cleanliness is non-negotiable when you're handling food for your betters. Your bedroom: a straw mat in the corner of the kitchen where the rats congregate for their nightly social gathering. If you're lucky, the cook might toss you an extra blanket during the winter months when the stone floor leaches all warmth from your small body. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several hundred years, so you learn to change your clothes and relieve yourself with an audience. Dignity is a luxury reserved for those with bedchambers. Your education consists of basic literacy, religious instruction, and the fine art of knowing when to be invisible. The castle chaplain raps your knuckles when you mispronounce Latin phrases during prayer, and you spend hours memorizing saints, days, and biblical passages that seem to have been specifically chosen for their length and incomprehensibility. You learn to stand perfectly still for hours as adults discuss boring political matters. One twitch and you'll receive a swift cuff to the ear from Lord Geoffrey, training for the endless blows your body will endure for the next 2 decades. Your legs cramp, your bladder screams for relief, but you dare not move. This is how you learn discipline, they say. This is how you become worthy of knighthood. The other pages become your family by default. A collection of similarly displaced children with whom you form alliances and rivalries that mirror the adult world. You learn quickly which boys will share their meager rations and which will steal yours when the adults aren't looking. You learn even more quickly which adults can be trusted, and which view children as convenient punching bags for their frustrations. Stop crying, the Master-at-Arms growls as he forces your small hands around a wooden practice sword on your 8th day in the household. Knights don't cry. The wooden sword feels impossibly heavy. Your arms shake with the effort of holding it aloft. You're 7, but childhood is a luxury reserved for children who aren't destined to become living weapons, while peasant children at least have time to play between chores. Your every waking moment is scheduled, supervised, and scrutinized. The sound of wooden swords clacking against shields fills the air, punctuated by the occasional yelp of a child being struck too hard. These are not practice taps. They're deliberate blows meant to toughen you up. You learn to swallow your tears, to transform pain into a dull, manageable ache that sits in your chest like an unwelcome guest. Your training includes horsemanship, which sounds romantic until you're placed on a horse that seems as tall as a cathedral. Your legs stretch painfully across its broad back, and the instructor tells you to control this half-ton animal with your thighs alone. You fall repeatedly. Each time, you're expected to remount immediately, regardless of injuries. The ground is hard, the horse is impatient, and sympathy is in short supply. At night, you collapse onto your straw mat, muscles burning, homesickness gnawing at your stomach like a physical hunger. The kitchen is dark, save for the dying embers in the hearth, casting long shadows that dance across the walls like demons. Sometimes you cry silently into your thin pillow, careful not to wake the other pages or kitchen staff. Sometimes you're too exhausted even for tears. You fall asleep dreaming of dragons and glory, not realizing that the only dragon you'll ever face is the one breathing down your neck every morning. The crushing pressure to become something your body isn't ready to be. You dream of rescuing princesses, unaware that most noble women would view you as furniture, not a potential husband. You're being trained as a weapon, not a hero, and the distinction will become painfully clear as you age. The years pass in a blur of repetitive tasks and incremental improvements. You grow taller, stronger, though never quite as tall or strong as the boys who receive regular meals and adequate rest. Your body adapts to its circumstances as bodies do, but at a cost. By 10, your hands are calloused beyond your years. By 12, you've suffered at least one broken bone that wasn't set properly and will plague you in damp weather for the rest of your life. And just when you've mastered the art of being a page, just when you can serve wine without trembling, stand for hours without fainting, and recite the necessary prayers without stumbling, it's time for your promotion. You're 14 now, no longer a child by medieval standards. It's time to become a squire. The squire years, teenage exploitation, at its finest. Congratulations, you've survived to age 14. Your reward: more work, higher stakes, and the constant reminder that one mistake could end your career before it begins. Promotion to squire is not a kindness. It's simply the next step in extracting maximum value from your developing body. As a squire, you're now personally assigned to an actual knight. Think of it as an unpaid internship where failure means public humiliation and possibly death. Your knight Sir Baldric is a miserable aging warrior with chronic back pain and a drinking problem. His glory days are 2 decades behind him, but he'll relive them every night over dinner, forcing you to listen to the same stories until you can recite them verbatim. The tale of how he single-handedly turned the tide at the Battle of Somewhere or Other grows more impressive with each retelling, as does the number of enemies slain by his mighty sword arm. Your daily routine makes your page years look like a vacation at a Mediterranean villa. You rise before the sun, when the castle is still shrouded in darkness, so complete you must feel your way along familiar corridors. The roosters haven't even considered crowing yet, but there's armor to be polished, horses to be exercised, and a knight to be prepared for the day. First, the armor, that persistent rust spot on Sir Baldric's breastplate. If you don't remove it, he'll make you sleep in the stables with the horses, which sounds almost pleasant until you consider the fleas, the cold, and the stable master's wandering hands. You scrub until your fingers bleed, using sand, vinegar, and old urine. The ammonia content makes it an effective cleaning agent, though the smell clings to your skin for hours afterward. Next, the horses. Sir Baldric owns 3, a palfrey for casual riding, a courser for hunting, and a massive destrier for battle. All 3 hate you with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. The destrier in particular seems to have made it his life's mission to step on your feet, bite your shoulder, or pin you against the stable wall whenever the opportunity presents itself. These are not the noble steeds of children's tales. They're half-wild animals that must be approached with caution and respect by now. Your stomach is growling. You haven't eaten since the previous evening's meager supper. But your hunger must wait, because it's time to prepare Sir Baldric's breakfast. You bring fresh bread from the kitchen, slicing it carefully and arranging it with cheese and cold meats on his silver platter. Your mouth waters at the sight, but you'll make do with the stale heel of yesterday's loaf, and perhaps an apple if the cook is feeling generous. Your food grows cold as you stand at attention, waiting to refill Sir Baldric's wine cup or fetch whatever condiment he suddenly desires. Finally, it's time to assist Sir Baldric into his armor, a process that takes an hour because his shoulder was dislocated in a tournament 3 years ago and never properly healed. He grunts and curses with each piece, blaming you for his pain as if you personally designed the human body's limited range of motion. The armor itself weighs nearly 60 pounds, and each piece must be strapped and buckled in a specific order. Make a mistake, and you'll start over from the beginning. His frustration growing with each reset. By 8 in the morning, it's time for training. He strikes you to toughen you up, but really because his wife left him for a younger, wealthier knight, and he's bitter about his declining status and receding hairline. The practice yard is where you learn that chivalry, that much vaunted code of knightly behavior, applies primarily to how knights treat other knights, not how they treat their squires. The training itself is brutal. Those wooden swords from your page days have been replaced with heavier practice weapons, deliberately made more substantial than real swords to build your muscles. Some training weapons are intentionally weighted with lead to make actual combat seem easier by comparison. Your body is constantly bruised, your fingers perpetually split and bleeding from countless small injuries that never quite heal before the next round of abuse. Sometimes you train against a quintin, a rotating arm with a shield at one end, and a weight at the other. The objective is to strike the shield with your lance while riding past at full gallop. Miss the shield, or fail to ride past quickly enough, and the weight swings around to knock you off your horse. It's an effective teaching tool and an even more effective humiliation device. The older squires place bets on how many times you'll fall during each training session again. Sir Baldric shouts as you pick yourself up from the mud for the 5th time that morning, the taste of blood sharp in your mouth from where you bit your tongue during the fall. My grandmother could hit harder than that, and she's been dead for 20 years. Your fellow squires aren't friends. They're competition. Only so many will make it to knighthood. The rest will become household guards or, worse, return home in disgrace. So you push yourself beyond what your body should endure. You ignore the pain in your shoulders, the recurring nightmares, the constant hunger because half your food goes to Sir Baldric's plate. When you collapse into bed each night, your muscles spasm uncontrollably, and you wonder if this is what dying feels like. In addition to combat training, you must master hunting, falconry, and horsemanship. You learn to track deer through dense forest, to control a hunting hawk that could easily blind you with its talons, and to ride at breakneck speeds across uneven terrain. Each of these skills comes with its own unique set of dangers and injuries. The scar on your forearm from an improperly handled falcon reminds you daily of the cost of inattention. You're also expected to train and discipline the pages, a task. You take perhaps too much pleasure in the cycle of abuse, continuing like a well-oiled machine. You find yourself repeating phrases that once made you cry when you were their age. Knights don't cry. Stand up straight, again, and this time like you mean it. You hate yourself a little for it, but the alternative is to appear soft, which is a luxury you cannot afford. The years pass in a haze of exhaustion and determination. Your body changes, growing stronger, more resilient. Wounds that once would have laid you up for days now barely register. Pain becomes your constant companion, so familiar that its absence would feel strange, unsettling. You learn to sleep anywhere, in any position, because rest is too precious to waste on comfort. And all the while, you're watching, learning, how to move in armor without looking like an armored beetle. How to read the subtle politics of the castle. Who's in favor, who's one misstep from exile. How to compose your face into a mask that reveals nothing of your thoughts or feelings. These are the true skills of knighthood, far more valuable than swordsmanship or lance work. The economics of knighthood. Hope you have rich parents. Here's something they don't tell you in the fairy tales. Becoming a knight is ruinously expensive. While you're busy getting the stuffing knocked out of you daily, your father is selling off parcels of land to finance your career. Each practice sword, each piece of armor, each tournament entry fee, all of it costs money that your family may or may not have. Let's talk numbers, shall we? A decent suit of armor in the 14th century would cost around £16, roughly equivalent to several years' wages for an average worker. If you wanted something fancy, the price skyrocketed. The armor, owned by Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, in 1397 was worth the staggering sum of £103, an amount that could purchase multiple houses or a small estate. The financial burden doesn't end with armor. A quality sword could cost £2. A decent warhorse anywhere from £10 to £80, depending on its bloodline and training. Then there's the cost of everyday maintenance, replacing broken equipment, caring for horses, paying for lodging and food when traveling to tournaments or on campaign. For context, a skilled carpenter or mason might earn around 6 shillings and 8 pence per year in the late 13th century. The armor and clothes provided to one Thomas Sturmy at his knighting ceremony in 1204 cost £6, 18 shillings, approximately 30 times the annual income of that carpenter. Imagine spending 30 years worth of salary just on your work uniform. But wait, there's more. You also need multiple horses, war horses, riding horses, pack horses, weapons, swords, lances, daggers, maces, attendants, because no self-respecting knight travels without at least one servant, tents and supplies for campaign, and fashionable clothes for court appearances, because showing up to the king's feast in last season's tunic is apparently worse than treason. All told, equipping a knight for battle could cost up to the equivalent of 500,000 in today's money. Some estimates go as high as 3.5 million for exceptionally well-equipped knights. Hope Daddy's been saving up. The sound of coins clinking as your father counts out his dwindling fortune haunts your dreams. The creak of a wooden chest being closed, with a heavy sigh, becomes the soundtrack of your advancement. Each new piece of equipment comes with the unspoken weight of familial expectation. This sword cost us 3 acres of good farmland. This helmet was your grandmother's dowry, jewels melted down and reshaped. If your family can't afford it, congratulations. You're now dependent on your lord's generosity, which means you'll be fighting his petty border disputes for the next 20 years while he keeps forgetting to pay you. Your armor will be second-hand, your horses past their prime, and your place in the social hierarchy constantly undermined by wealthier knights, who can afford gilded spurs and embroidered surcoats. The economic reality of knighthood creates a strange paradox. You're simultaneously elite and impoverished, noble and indebted. You might be addressed as Sir and invited to dine at the high table, but your stomach growls because you haven't eaten in 2 days, having spent your last coins on repairing your helmet before the upcoming tournament. This financial strain only increases as you progress in your career. Tournament prizes rarely cover the cost of participation. Ransoms captured in battle might provide occasional windfalls, but they're unpredictable at best. And all the while, inflation gradually erodes the value of whatever fixed income you might have from family lands or lordly stipends. By the time you reach your mid-20s, still waiting for that elusive dubbing ceremony that will transform you from squire to knight, you've already mortgaged your future. The question is no longer if you can afford to become a knight, but whether you can afford to be one once you achieve the title. The gilded trappings of knighthood conceal a profession that, for many, leads to debt, dependency, and financial ruin. And yet, you persist. Because what's the alternative? Return home in disgrace. Abandon the identity you've spent your entire life building. Accept that the past decade of pain and sacrifice was for nothing. No, you'll continue on this path, regardless of the cost, financial, physical, or spiritual, because that's what knights do. They endure as your 21st birthday approaches. You look in the mirror if your lord owns such a luxury item and barely recognize yourself. The soft-faced child who arrived at the castle 14 years ago has been replaced by a weathered man with calloused hands and calculating eyes. You've survived. Whether that's a victory or merely a postponement of defeat remains to be seen. The dubbing ceremony, peak versus reality. You've made it to 21. Against all odds. You've survived the training, the humiliation, and the constant injuries. Today is your dubbing ceremony, the moment you've been waiting for since you were 7 years old. This is it. The culmination of 14 years of back-breaking work and systematic abuse disguised as character building. Surely, this will be your moment of glory. Reality check. The ceremony itself is equal parts religious ordeal and hazing ritual. The night before, you're stripped of your everyday clothes and bathed in water that's been blessed by a priest. The symbolic washing away of sins might be more meaningful if you weren't acutely aware of every pair of eyes scrutinizing your battle-scarred body. Is that ribcage supposed to be that visible? Are those scars honorable or merely signs of incompetence? The whispers follow you from the bath to the chapel. You spend the night before in prayer vigil, kneeling on cold stone, until your knees feel like they're bleeding through the thin cushion provided. Hour after hour, you're expected to contemplate your unworthiness and pray for divine guidance in your new role. By morning, you're hallucinating from exhaustion, which the Church considers a sign of spiritual awakening, rather than a predictable outcome of sleep deprivation. The chapel is frigid at dawn, your breath forming clouds in the air that rise toward the vaulted ceiling like prayers. Your limbs are stiff, your knees screaming in protest as you rise after your night-long vigil. The assembled witnesses, family members who've traveled at great expense. Your Lord and his household, perhaps even a bishop if you're particularly well-connected, regard you with expressions ranging from pride to thinly veiled boredom. This is, after all, just another dubbing ceremony in an endless procession of young men joining the ranks of knighthood. The actual dubbing, a hard smack across the face or shoulders with the flat of a sword that's supposed to be the last blow you take without returning it. Except it won't be, because your entire career will be taking hits for someone else's benefit. The symbolic slap stings more than expected, a final reminder that pain will be your constant companion throughout your knightly career. The solemn sound of chapel bells rings through the stone corridors. The murmur of prayers rises and falls, like ocean waves. The sharp crack of hand against cheek echoes in the sacred space, followed by a momentary silence that stretches into eternity. "Rise, Sir Arthur," intones the Lord, "and serve faithfully unto death." That last part isn't metaphorical. It's a job description. You have just sworn fealty to your Lord, promising to defend his interests with your life, if necessary. The smiling faces around you, the congratulatory claps on your newly armored shoulders, the feast that follows, all of it obscures the fundamental truth of your new position. You are now a weapon, to be wielded at your Lord's discretion against his enemies, whoever they might be. The ceremonial sword and spurs you receive are symbols of your new status, but they're also reminders of your obligations. The sword represents your duty to fight. The spurs, your readiness to ride into battle at a moment's notice. The white belt symbolizes purity, an almost laughable concept given the bloody nature of your profession. The ceremony transforms you from a man into a concept, the ideal of knighthood, which bears little resemblance to the reality you're about to experience. As the ceremony concludes and the feast begins, you're seated at a place of honor for perhaps the first time in your life. The food is plentiful, the wine flows freely, and everyone seems genuinely happy for you. Enjoy it while it lasts. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Your daily life as a knight, discomfort with a side of violence. Congratulations on your knighthood. Your reward is a lifetime of chronic pain, political servitude, and the constant threat of violent death. Let's look at what your average day entails. Now that you've achieved the rank you've been working toward since childhood. Morning, the joys of medieval hygiene. You wake at dawn, your body a catalogue of injuries, old and new. That shoulder you dislocated in training 3 years ago. It predicts rain better than any astrologer. Your back, a symphony of complaints from years of wearing armor that weighs as much as a modern refrigerator. The knee you wrenched during a tournament last summer throbs in time with your heartbeat, a percussive reminder of your mortality. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did practice hygiene if you were wealthy enough. As a knight, you're expected to wash your face and hands daily at minimum. But this isn't your relaxing morning shower. It's a quick, miserable affair with cold water and harsh soap, if you're lucky enough to have soap at all. The lye burns your skin, leaving it red and raw. But cleanliness is necessary for someone of your station. The splash of cold water against your face shocks you fully awake. Your teeth chatter as you scrub away the night's sweat. The persistent itch of healing wounds reminds you not to scrub too vigorously over certain areas. Those who could afford it might bathe fully with expensive oils and Castile soap made from olive oil. The catch: there was no privacy. You might conduct business, eat, or chat with friends while bathing. Nothing says knightly dignity like discussing military strategy while naked in a wooden tub. Servants constantly entering to add more hot water or to take notes on your battlefield plans. For the poorest knights, and yes, poor knights definitely existed, hygiene might be more sporadic. A quick rinse in a horse trough or stream would suffice when nothing better was available. During campaigns, you might go weeks without a proper wash, the grime and sweat accumulating under your armor until you smelled like a particularly ripe cheese left in the sun. Skin diseases were particularly prevalent among knights and men-at-arms, partly due to the constant chafing of armor against unwashed skin. Fungal infections flourished in the warm, moist environment created by chainmail worn over a padded gambeson. Lice and fleas were constant companions, especially during military campaigns when you slept in close quarters with dozens of other equally unwashed men. Even the religious sometimes embraced poor hygiene as a form of piety. The clergy were notoriously susceptible to parasites, with some religious figures deliberately avoiding bathing as a form of mortification of the flesh. Thankfully, as a knight, extreme filthiness wasn't expected of you, quite the opposite. Your status demanded at least a basic level of cleanliness, if only to differentiate you from the peasantry. Armor, your mobile prison. Remember that expensive armor your family bankrupted themselves to provide. It's your second skin now, and just as uncomfortable as it sounds, chainmail weighs between 40 to 50 pounds, and distributes that weight across your shoulders and hips. Full plate armor, up to 80 pounds distributed across your body. The good news is that properly fitted armor allows reasonable movement. The bad news is everything else. It's hot. Imagine wearing a metal sauna in summer nights routinely passed out from heat exhaustion during tournaments or battle. The padded gambeson worn underneath to prevent chafing traps heat against your body, creating a microclimate of pure misery. Sweat pools in uncomfortable places, unable to evaporate properly through layers of padding and metal. It's cold. In winter, the metal becomes painfully cold against your skin, conducting away your body heat with remarkable efficiency. The same properties that make armor uncomfortably hot in summer make it unbearably cold in winter. Frostbite becomes a genuine concern when metal plates press against exposed skin in freezing temperatures. It chafes. Chainmail creates its own unique pattern of bruises and abrasions where the links rub against your skin. Even with proper padding, certain areas, shoulders, collarbones, hips, bear the brunt of the weight and develop chronic irritation. The constant friction creates calluses in strange places, a knight's body adapting to its metal shell. Over time, it rusts, Cleaning rust off armor was a constant battle, requiring hours of maintenance. Salt from sweat accelerates the corrosion, meaning that every time you wear your armor, you're actively damaging it. The cost of keeping armor in fighting condition is yet another drain on your limited resources. The persistent squeak and creak of metal joints announces your presence wherever you go. The weight shifts with every step, creating a rolling gait, distinctive to men who spend most of their lives in armor. The suffocating closeness of your helmet restricts your vision to a narrow slit. The world reduced to a letterbox view that leaves you vulnerable to attacks from above or below. And let's talk about bodily functions. Need to relieve yourself. Hope you brought a squire to help you disassemble half your armor. The process of removing enough armor to perform basic bodily functions could take several minutes. You might not have during battle or when traveling long distances. Many knights simply soiled themselves during prolonged engagements, adding another delightful aroma to the already pungent bouquet of sweat, blood, and fear that defined medieval combat. The practical reality of armor meant that most knights didn't wear their full kit unless absolutely necessary. Day-to-day activities were conducted in civilian clothes, with perhaps a sword at the hip as a symbol of status. Full armor was reserved for battle, tournaments, and ceremonial occasions. This didn't make it any more comfortable when you did have to wear it, but at least you weren't trapped in a metal cage 24/7. Meals, culinary adventures in mediocrity as a knight. Your diet is better than a peasant's, but still nothing to write home about. Meals are heavy on meat, often preserved with so much salt you can feel your arteries closing, bread and ale. Vegetables are viewed with suspicion. They grow in dirt, after all, and are therefore peasant food. The tearing sound of bread being ripped apart fills the hall during meals. The slurping of stew directly from wooden bowl spoons exist, but aren't always used, creates a cacophony of dining sounds. The ominous gurgle of unhappy digestive systems provides a constant background noise in any gathering of knights. Feast days provide more variety, but are followed by days of digestive distress. Food poisoning is a regular occurrence in an era before refrigeration or basic understanding of germ theory. That mysterious meat pie at Lord What's-its banquet could be venison, could be 3D old pork, could be the reason you're vomiting behind your tent tomorrow. The spices used to mask the taste of spoiling meat wreak havoc on your digestive system. Imported pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg demonstrate your lord's wealth but do little for your intestinal health. The combination of rich food, strong spices, and copious amounts of alcohol creates a perfect storm of gastrointestinal distress that medieval physicians attributed to an imbalance of humors rather than obvious dietary causes. Fasting days, mandated by the church, provide a welcome respite for your overworked digestive system but leave you irritable and weak. When they coincide with days of heavy physical activity, try jousting on an empty stomach sometime. It's not recommended. Religious duties, hope you like praying. Knights aren't just warriors, they're supposed to be God's warriors. This means endless religious obligations that intrude on what little free time you might otherwise enjoy. Daily prayers are non-negotiable. Morning, noon, evening, and sometimes in between. Your day is structured around devotional obligations that cannot be shirked without risking both social censure and divine punishment. The repetitive Latin phrases become so ingrained in your memory that you sometimes mutter them in your sleep. According to your squire, regular attendance at Mass is expected, regardless of whatever else might be happening. Battle tomorrow, better. Attend Vespers tonight, Tournament in the morning. Make sure you're at prime beforehand. The church's schedule takes precedence over military necessities, creating constant tension between your spiritual and martial obligations. Religious fasting always seems to coincide with when you need your strength most. Somehow, the church calendar conspires to place major fasting days immediately before significant military engagements. Fighting on an empty stomach becomes yet another test of your devotion and discipline. Pilgrimages to distant shrines take you away from your military duties for weeks or months at a time, straining your already precarious finances and testing your Lord's patience. But refusing to undertake these journeys would mark you as impious at best, heretical at worst. These duties aren't optional. The church has its fingers in every aspect of medieval life, and openly neglecting your religious obligations could brand you a heretic, a label that ends careers and sometimes lives. So you pray, fast, confess, and donate to the church, all while wondering if God truly expects his warriors to spend quite so much time on their knees when there are battles to be fought. The monotonous drone of group prayer echoes through stone chapels. The scrape of knees against hard floors creates a constant undertone to religious services. The growl of empty stomachs during fasting periods provides an ironic counterpoint to sermons about spiritual nourishment. Combat, not as advertised. Remember those glorious tales of single combat, where knights face each other honorably on the battlefield. Pure fiction. The reality of medieval warfare bears little resemblance to the romantic stories you heard as a child. Real medieval combat was chaotic, terrifying, and decidedly inglorious. Most of your time isn't spent in battle at all, but in tedious sieges, sitting outside castle walls for months, watching your comrades die of dysentery while waiting for the inhabitants to starve. The boredom of siege warfare is punctuated by occasional sorties or assaults, brief bursts of terrifying violence that are over almost before you can process what happened. When battle does come, it's nothing like the stories. It's loud, the clanging of weapons, the screams of the wounded, the shouting of commands, all creating a cacophony that makes it impossible to hear orders. Communication on the battlefield relies on predetermined signals and formations because verbal commands become useless once combat is joined. It's confusing. Dust clouds, smoke, and the press of bodies mean you often can't see more than a few feet in any direction. Friend and foe become difficult to distinguish in the chaos, leading to tragic instances of knights killing their own allies by mistake. It's brief but eternal. Most medieval battles lasted only a few hours, but when you're in the middle of one, time stretches like taffy. Each moment of combat feels like an eternity, your body operating on instinct and training while your mind struggles to process the sensory overload. The thunderous crash of bodies meeting in the initial charge reverberates through your armor. The screams of wounded men and horses create a hellish soundtrack that will haunt your dreams for years to come. The wet, sickening sound of weapons finding flesh becomes disturbingly familiar. Contrary to romantic notions, knights weren't always chivalrous. The code of chivalry mainly applied to how knights treated other knights, not peasants, not common soldiers, not anyone deemed beneath them. In practice, knights were often more like expensive thugs in the employ of landowners and rival nobles. The feudal violence became so bad in the late 10th century that the Catholic Church launched a campaign known as the Peace of God, which forbade anyone from attacking peasants, clergymen, and other non-combatants, a rule that was honored more in the breach than the observance. When knights were taken as prisoners of war, they were customarily held for ransom in somewhat comfortable surroundings. This same standard of conduct did not apply to non-knights, archers, peasants, foot soldiers, who were often slaughtered after capture. They were viewed during battle as mere impediments to knights getting two other knights to fight them obstacles, to be removed rather than combatants worthy of respect. The ideals of chivalry made for good stories, but poor military strategy. Armies gradually adopted a more realistic approach to warfare than the honor-bound code of knightly combat would suggest. Tactics evolved to include massed archery, pike formations, and eventually gunpowder weapons, all of which rendered the heavily armored knight increasingly obsolete on the battlefield. You thought being a knight meant glory. Turns out it's 90% back pain and 10% praying you don't get dysentery under your helmet. The political game. Playing chess with your life. Being a knight isn't just about fighting. It's about navigating a political minefield where one wrong step could cost you everything. The feudal system is a complex web of obligations and alliances, with you caught somewhere in the middle, powerful enough to command respect from peasants, but ultimately beholden to lords who view you as an expendable asset. Your lord's enemies are your enemies, whether you've met them or not. Their allies are your allies, even if they've insulted your entire family. You're a chess piece in a game where you can't see the board, moved about by players who consider you expendable. Your personal feelings about the latest border dispute or succession crisis are irrelevant. Your oath of fealty demands that you fight whoever your lord tells you to fight. The scratch of quills on parchment, as marriage contracts are signed seals, fates and creates alliances. The forced smiles at political banquets conceal seething resentments and calculated advantages. The whispered warnings about who not to offend travel through castle corridors like ghosts. Marriage, that's not about love, it's about alliances. If your lord suggests you marry Lady Constance of Swampshire, you'd better smile and agree, even if Lady Constance has a face like a disappointed mule and a personality to match. Her father controls the river crossing your lord wants, and your personal happiness is irrelevant to strategic geography. Your worth as a knight is measured not just in your fighting ability, but in your political utility. Can you be married off to secure an alliance? Can you be sent as an envoy to a rival court? Can you be trusted to oversee a portion of your lord's lands without getting ideas above your station? These questions determine your value far more than your skill with a sword. The constant jockeying for position at court creates an atmosphere of perpetual tension. Who's in favor this week? Who's fallen from grace? Who's whispering in the Lord's ear about your supposed failings? The politics of a medieval court would make modern office politics look like a children's tea party, and all the while you're expected to maintain the appearance of unwavering loyalty. Questioning your lord's decisions, even obviously foolish ones, is tantamount to treason, so you smile and nod and lead your men into yet another pointless skirmish over a worthless patch of land, because that's what knights do. They serve regardless of the cost to themselves or others. The rustling of expensive fabrics as courtiers maneuver for position near the lord. The clink of wine cups raised in insincere toasts. The sound of forced laughter at the lord's jokes, regardless of whether they're actually funny. These are the sounds of medieval politics, as deadly in their way as any battlefield. Injuries and aging. Medieval healthcare is not OSHA approved. Knights didn't usually die in battle. The romantic notion of a glorious death on the battlefield, immortalized in song by adoring minstrels, that was the exception. not the rule. More often, knights died from infections from untreated wounds. In an era before antibiotics or even basic understanding of germ theory, a simple cut could lead to sepsis and death. The battlefield was a filthy environment, and weapons carried all manner of bacteria. Even if you survived the initial injury, the subsequent infection might kill you days or weeks later. Your body slowly consumed by fever and putrefaction, internal injuries that no one knew how to treat. That blow to the head that left you dizzy and vomiting could be a concussion, a skull fracture, or bleeding in the brain. Medieval medicine had no way to diagnose or treat such injuries, leaving knights to either recover through sheer luck or deteriorate without understanding why. Abdominal wounds were particularly deadly, with damage to internal organs going undetected until it was too late. Diseases spread in the close quarters of military camps. Dysentery, typhoid, and various fevers swept through army encampments with devastating efficiency. More soldiers died from disease than from enemy action in most medieval campaigns. The combination of poor sanitation, contaminated water, and crowded conditions created perfect breeding grounds for pathogens of all kinds. If you survived to retirement age, which many didn't, your body was a tapestry of old injuries, poorly set bones, and chronic pain. That shoulder that never quite healed right. It prevents you from raising your sword above chest height now. The knee that took a mace blow 5 years ago. It collapses without warning, especially in damp weather. The fingers that were crushed when your hand was stepped on by a wall. They no longer straighten completely, making it difficult to grip your weapons with the necessary strength. Medieval medicine consisted primarily of bloodletting, herbal remedies of questionable efficacy, and prayers. Lots and lots of prayers. The theory of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow, bile, and black bile, dominated medical thinking, with most treatments designed to restore the proper balance rather than address the actual injury. Need surgery? Hope you enjoy having a drunk barber operate on you without anesthesia while quoting Galen incorrectly. The grinding sound of bone against improperly healed bone accompanies your every movement. Your labored breathing, the result of lungs damaged by years in dusty battlefields and damp castles, marks you as a knight before you even speak. The persistent cough that never quite goes away worsens with each passing winter, until blood-flecked phlegm becomes a normal part of your morning routine. One of the more successful treatments for wounds in the Middle Ages was finding the weapon that inflicted it, praying over the weapon, and then destroying it. Medicine was a mix of superstition, religion, and the occasional effective herbal remedy stumbled upon through centuries of trial and error. For every poultice that actually helped prevent infection, there were dozens of treatments that did nothing, or actively made the condition worse. The fate of aging or wounded knights varied widely depending on their social connections and financial resources. Some were granted lands by grateful lords, allowing them to live out their remaining years in relative comfort. Others found positions training younger knights, passing on their knowledge while their bodies gradually failed them. Many simply faded into obscurity, living on whatever meager savings they had managed to accumulate. The most unfortunate might find themselves begging in the streets, their former glory reduced to stories told for pennies. A knight with no family, no lands, and no pension from a generous lord could quickly find himself destitute once he was no longer capable of fighting. The same society that celebrated his martial prowess in youth had little use for him once that prowess faded. Even for knights who managed to secure a comfortable retirement, the physical toll of their career followed them to the grave. Skeletal remains of medieval knights show distinctive patterns of trauma and arthritis, telling tales of lives spent in violent service. Spinal deformities from years of wearing heavy armor, healed fractures that left limbs shortened or misaligned, evidence of repeated blows to the head, accumulated over decades of combat and training. These were not the bodies of men who died peacefully in their sleep after long, healthy lives. These were bodies that had been used as weapons until they broke, then patched together and used again until they could no longer function. The medieval knight's body was a consumable resource, spent in service to lords who might not even remember their names a generation later. Tournament life. The medieval NFL, with more permanent injuries. Let's talk about tournaments, those supposedly glamorous events when knights displayed their prowess and won fame, fortune, and the admiration of noble ladies. The reality. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of professional sports, but with higher mortality rates and worse medical care. Tournaments began as relatively unregulated affairs that resembled actual battles more than sporting events. Early tournaments, called mallees, involved large groups of knights fighting in open fields with weapons that were only nominally blunted. Deaths were common, injuries expected, and the line between tournament combat and actual warfare was blurry at best. By the 13th and 14th centuries, tournaments had become more formalized, with jousting taking center stage. Two knights charging at each other with 10-foot lances while riding at full gallop. What could possibly go wrong? The lance was designed to shatter on impact to reduce injuries, but this was cold comfort when several pounds of splintered wood exploded against your helmet or found the gap between armor plates. Common tournament injuries included concussions and traumatic brain injuries from repeated blows to the head, broken collarbones and ribs from lance strikes, dislocated shoulders from the impact of receiving or delivering blows, crushed extremities from falls or being trampled by horses, puncture wounds when weapons found gaps in armor. Medieval tournaments were made up of martial sports called hasteludes, and were not only a major spectator sport, but also played as a real combat. Simulation. They usually ended with many knights either injured or even killed. Despite the dangers, tournaments were essential to a knight's career. They provided opportunities to win prize money, demonstrate skill to potential employers, and advance socially through displays of martial prowess. The economic reality of tournament participation was harsh. Entry fees, equipment costs, and travel expenses meant that many knights actually lost money by participating, gambling on their ability to win prizes or attract a patron. Those without family, wealth, or lordly sponsorship might bankrupt themselves in pursuit of tournament glory, risking their bodies and their financial future for a chance at advancement. The social aspects of tournaments, the pageantry, the feasting, the courtly romance, obscured their fundamental purpose as training for warfare and recruitment events for military talent. Behind the colorful banners and heraldic displays was the cold calculation of lords evaluating which knights might be worth hiring for their next campaign. And all the while, the physical toll mounted. Each tournament left its mark, adding new injuries to the collection, gradually diminishing a knight's effectiveness until eventually they were forced to retire or die in competition. The tournament circuit created a generation of prematurely aged warriors, their bodies broken by years of controlled violence masquerading as sport. The reality check. What they never told. You thought being a knight meant glory and honor. rescuing damsels, slaying dragons, tournaments where the best man wins. A noble death, immortalized in song, what it actually meant, chronic pain and injury, serving lords who see you as disposable, killing people you've never met for reasons you don't understand, tournaments where the wealthy and well-connected win, dying slowly from infection after being stabbed with a rusty dagger by a peasant who got lucky. The myths of medieval warfare emerged from romantic stories and later historical misinterpretations. Battles were portrayed as all-important, fought by opposing armies of knights adhering to codes of chivalry and honor. The reality was far messier, with sieges, skirmishes, and raids making up the majority of military actions, and pragmatism generally overriding idealistic notions of proper combat. Chivalry itself, that much vaunted code of knightly behavior, was established partly as an attempt to rein in the violence of knights. When not on campaign, knights could be a destabilizing force in medieval society, using their fighting skills and status to terrorize the local population. The code of chivalry was the medieval equivalent of telling professional fighters, yes, you're trained to kill people, but could you please only do it when and where we tell you to? The long-standing myth that knights were always chivalrous by nature ignores historical evidence that many used their position primarily for personal gain, operating essentially as hired muscle for whoever could pay them. While some knights undoubtedly strived to live up to chivalric ideals, many others paid lip service to the concept while behaving in decidedly unchivalrous ways when it suited their interests. Even the equipment and tactics of knights have been romanticized beyond recognition. The image of the heavily armored knight on horseback, lance-couched, charging gloriously into battle represents only a small fraction of medieval combat reality. Knights fought on foot as often as mounted, used a variety of weapons beyond the stereotypical sword and lance, and adapted their tactics to the situation rather than adhering to some idealized form of combat. Subscribe if medieval career counseling failed you to dot the legacy. Not even famous in death. Even if you do everything right, survive the training, win battles, serve faithfully, your legacy is far from guaranteed. Chronicles and songs celebrate kings and high nobles, rarely the knights who died for them. After an insignificant knight is killed in battle, they pretty much fall out of the narrative. They've served their role. The songs will immortalize the lord who led the charge, not the dozen knights who died making it successful. The chroniclers will record the king's brilliant strategy, not the commanders who actually developed it or the knights who executed it. Your name, if it appears at all in historical records, might be a single line in a casualty list or a brief mention in a land grant. Your body, should you fall in battle, might not even receive a proper burial. On medieval battlefields, common soldiers were often buried in mass graves, if they were buried at all. Knights might fare slightly better, but not by much. The practicalities of decomposition meant that bodies needed to be dealt with quickly, especially during summer campaigns. Unless you were of high noble birth, your final resting place might be a hastily dug trench shared with dozens of other fallen warriors. The wind whispers across an empty battlefield, carrying away the last echoes of combat. The distant cawing of crows marks the presence of unburied dead. The silence where your name used to be expands until it seems to encompass the entire world. For all your sacrifices, for all the pain endured and blood shed, your legacy might be nothing more than a rusting sword passed down to a nephew who never knew you, or an obscure tombstone in a village church that will be demolished and forgotten within a few generations. The system that demanded your lifelong service rewards you with oblivion. Your individual identity subsumed into the generic category of knight. One of thousands who lived and died in service to lords whose names are still remembered, while yours is lost. This erasure extended even to knights who survived their careers. As warfare evolved and the role of heavy cavalry diminished, knights gradually lost their military significance. By the late Middle Ages, new methods of warfare, including the introduction of gunpowder weapons, began to render classical knights in armor obsolete. The social rank remained, but the practical function that had given it meaning slowly disappeared. Some knights adapted, finding new roles as administrators, courtiers, or military officers in the emerging professional armies. Others clung to increasingly anachronistic ideals of chivalry and knighthood, becoming living anachronisms in a world that was moving on without them. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, 1459 to 1519, is often referred to as the last knight in this regard, embodying chivalric ideals even as they were becoming militarily irrelevant. Perhaps the cruelest legacy of knighthood was the gap between its idealized image and its historical reality. Even in their own time, knights rarely lived up to the standards set for them in chivalric literature. The mythologizing began almost immediately, with troubadours and poets transforming the brutal reality of medieval warfare into something noble and romantic. This process continued through the centuries, culminating in the Victorian reimagining of knighthood as the epitome of gentlemanly virtue, a conception that would have bewildered actual medieval knights, so the knight's true legacy might be this ongoing misrepresentation, this persistent myth that obscures the physical suffering, moral compromises, and often thankless service that constituted the reality of knightly existence. Your pain becomes someone else's entertainment, your struggles romanticized beyond recognition by people who would never have survived a day of your actual life, the unromantic truth. So there you have it, the unvarnished truth about knighthood. Not the glamorous career your childhood storybooks promised, but a brutal life of service, pain, and likely obscurity. A life where your body is a resource to be exploited until it breaks, your identity subsumed into your function, your individual desires subordinated to the needs of lords and kingdoms that might not even remember your name a generation after. Your death, the next time you romanticize the Middle Ages, remember that shining armor was a prison of heat, weight, and chafing that left permanent marks on the bodies of those who wore it. It required constant maintenance to prevent rust, represented a ruinous financial investment, and gradually became obsolete as military technology evolved. That noble steed was a half-ton animal with a mind of its own, prone to panic in battle. Conditions requiring years of specialized training, and representing yet another massive expense that many knights struggled to afford. A good warhorse could cost as much as all a knight's armor and weapons combined. That castle was a cold, drafty building with minimal sanitation, where privacy was non-existent and comfort secondary to defensive considerations. Living in a castle meant contending with smoke-filled holes, inadequate heating, and the constant noise of dozens or hundreds of people living in close proximity. That code of chivalry was mostly about how knights treated other knights, not common people. It was a professional ethos for a warrior class, not a universal moral code, and it was honored as much in the breach as in the observance. The romanticization of chivalry came primarily from literary sources, rather than actual knightly behavior. The final sounds of armor being packed away echo through empty halls. The closing of a chest signals the end of another campaign, another year of service. The dying of a fire as night falls on another day reminds you that time is passing, your body failing, your relevance fading. So sleep well, dear listener, in your comfortable bed, with your antibiotics and indoor plumbing. The past may call to us with its tales of glory and honor, but the reality was far more brutal than any story would have you believe. The medieval knight, that icon of chivalry and martial prowess, was in truth a man trapped in a system that valued his fighting ability over his humanity, that used his body as a weapon until it broke, and that promised glory while delivering pain. The irony of knighthood might be that its most enduring legacy is not the actual historical reality, but the romantic myth that obscures it, a myth that continues to captivate our imagination while erasing the physical suffering and moral compromises that defined the actual experience of medieval knights. We remember the shining armor and forget the broken bodies inside it. We celebrate the ideals of chivalry and ignore how rarely they were realized in practice. Perhaps that's the final indignity for the medieval knight, to be remembered, not as they were, but as we wish they had been, to have their pain transformed into entertainment, their struggles into romance, their often thankless service into glorious adventure. The historical reality disappears beneath layers of myth and misunderstanding, until the actual men who lived and died as knights become as fictional as the dragons they never slew. Subscribe if you've ever been grateful for modern medicine, labor, laws, or the absence of people trying to stab you on your commute.